Morning, B-Sides. What's going on? Come on. No, it's 10. You guys are still up at this hour, right? You haven't gone to bed yet. Well, thank you, Eric. What's up, everyone? My name's Tim. I am going to be talking about going dark with consumer electronics. A little bit about me first. I'm a father, a husband, a yinzer. By day, I build socks, and by night, I have panic attacks and read privacy policies and freak out about them. That being said, because this is the first time I actually can include my employer, I have to say something. All opinions expressed are my own and do not represent the opinions of my employer. So let's talk about going dark with consumer electronics. We'll hop into it, right? Well, it's simple. Don't use it. Great, questions. We got like 35 minutes. But no, seriously. We're going to talk about a couple things today. First things first, we're going to talk about the privacy problem. We're going to then go on to talk about some tools that you can use today. You can walk out of here and use these tools today to sort of start taking some of that privacy back. We're going to talk about some pro gamer moves after that, right? Everyone loves that. And then walk you through a practical example. And hopefully we should have some time for some Q&A. That's usually my favorite portion of this talk. That being said, like Philly D says, let's just jump into it. So here's the deal. We work in and live in interesting times where everything has a Wi-Fi chip. And it makes some things super cool. I can play Angry Birds on my refrigerator. I've always wanted to do that. When I was a little boy, I said to my mom, one day I will be able to throw a red bird at pigs on a refrigerator. And she said, we should pay more for therapy. Right? But all these offer really cool conveniences to modern day life, right? I love being able to yell at my Alexa and tell it to turn the thermostat down when my wife sets it to an unreasonable 74 degrees in the middle of summer, right? Here's the problem. All of these interesting, fun things require an account, right, that's tied to you. And all of these things contain a lot of information about who you are as a person, right? Your habits, your likes, your dislikes. It was not too long ago that the only time you were recorded while eating dinner was when you were in the federal prison system. Now, we just are willingly putting microphones and cameras in our kitchens, right? So, what's happening with all this information? What are they doing? They wouldn't let me bring the tinfoil hat into the casino. I can't imagine why. So let's talk about a couple things. First things first, we have you, right? Then we have the things that you use to interact with the world, right? Your computer, your phone, your debit, your credit card. And then we have your life, essentially. The things you buy, the things you drive, the things you take pictures of, your medical, the friends you have on social media. And all of that is inextricably tied together, right? With those accounts that we were just talking about, right? You have a bank account that has a sign-in. You can then see that, your purchase, the bank can see your purchases. All that's information that's very valuable to companies. A lot of times they say that they're listening to you, and they're really not. It's just they're able to collect a bunch of ancillary information from all the devices that you use, including these devices in your home, right? And they're able to do that. I'm sorry for anyone who's a database engineer. I hate databases. But we're going to talk about primary keys for a second, right? And some of the simple ones that we can sort of control, right? So our phone number, our email address, our name, our address, our IP address, and the IMEI of our phone, right? Those are all things we have fairly decent control over. So now, what do we do when we say going dark? What can we do with this information? Well, we have this rat's nest of connections, right? What we want to start doing is essentially building firewalls between all of these lifestyle choices, essentially, right? What would you do? What could be learned about you if you only use one credit card and one phone number and one IP address for your auto insurance, right? What could be learned if you only use one name, a separate credit card, a separate phone, a separate computer for your social media accounts, right? It becomes a lot harder to make a profile of you as opposed to this mess, right? So we'll talk about some essentials that you can use to sort of start undoing this rat's nest and firewalling off your life. First things first is your phone. Now, I'm treading into scary territory here. We're going to start with the Apple Android debate, okay? And I'm sorry to anyone who's a green bubble boy. You're not going to like this. I want to make something clear, though. Secure does not necessarily equal private. Both platforms, for the most part, are just as secure as one another. Where the privacy aspect comes in, I think that we can all safely say that an ad company owning a phone operating system is less private than a hardware company owning a phone ecosystem, right? So here's the thing. You're going to want to pick yourself up an iPhone. Now, when I used to give this talk, we're just glossing right over that. When I used to give this talk, I used to be able to say, iPhones were cheap, right? It used to be that, it wasn't $1,000 to get, the latest and greatest. The barrier to entry was like $200. Well, I don't know if you've noticed in the past couple of years, some interesting things have happened, right? So now I really can't say that. The barrier to entry is about $400 for one of these very, very sweet iPhone SEs with a fairly decent amount of storage, right? I do have some honorable mentions. One of them is Graphene OS. Graphene OS is a fork of what formerly was known as Copperhead OS. Copperhead OS, there's a whole, they call it drama. I don't know if it's necessarily drama. Their business model's interesting. Graphene OS is open source. It's Android made private by design. So if you own a Google device, you can flash this to it. The problem is that when you strip out all the fun Google stuff, it kind of makes it functionally unusable. So that's privacy for you. Anyway, so we got our phone. Next up, cell service, right? We've all heard of SIM swapping attacks. The idea here is that we're going to get a new phone number, but we're not necessarily going to use that phone number, right? So we need a new SIM card. I sound like a drug dealer. I recommend prepaid cards. Specifically, I mentioned a lot of services in this talk. I'm not affiliated with any of them, just to be clear. I recommend Mint, mostly because you can go to Best Buy and pay for them in cash, and you get T-Mobile service, which is meh, but it's better than like U.S. Mobility or whatever MVMO they have at your local Walgreens, right? It was about $70 for the year. And you get a phone you get a phone number and a decent amount of data, and they don't require you to give real names. You don't have to provide your real name, which is fantastic, right? The other option, and this is the Ed Snowden option, in my opinion. There's a group called the Calix Institute. They will offer you a free Wi-Fi hotspot with a $600 donation annually. Listen, we're laughing about money. We're going to talk about that at the end. Don't worry. But you can leverage that Wi-Fi hotspot with an iPod Touch, which they recently discontinued, much to my chagrin. But you can still pick them up on the second market. So now we have our device, right? We now need to actually use it for something. Okay. So the first things first. What does every service require when you sign up for it besides a name, not necessarily yours? That's right. Email. Thank you for whoever shouted that out. We need private email. So when we're looking for private email, what we're looking for is a brand new account from a privacy-focused provider. You're going to want to do the due diligence of, long password, 2FA. We're not using this email account, by the way. So don't make it like cheerleadergirl69 at protonmail.com, right? We don't want any identifiable information, although there are some people in this crowd that might not be identifiable. You're not going to use that email address anywhere, though. We're not signing up for anything with it. It's purely there for the next part of this toolkit. When I talk about private email, I really only am recommending these 4 right now: Proton Mail, Mailbox RU, Tuntanota, which I'm sure is how that's pronounced, and Start Mail. These are providers that have had their privacy protections tested in a court of law. It used to be that I had this big long list that I used to tell people and point to and say, hey, these are people you should check out. That is not the case anymore. A lot of these providers have had some sort of court order where they've been forced to hand over information, and they've actually handed it over. So that's private email. What do we need next? Well, we need to actually be able to use our email. And that's where our next tool, AnonAddy, comes in. So AnonAddy is essentially a service that allows you to create on-the-fly email addresses that will forward to your private mail address. So now we've eliminated the need to give out our email address to every single service. Now, Gmail offers something similar to this, right, where you used to be able to put, like, spam plus your cheerleader69@gmail.com, right, and have that filter. This is similar, but you don't need to, as long as the end domain is the same, and you can use custom domains. You can use the ones provided by AnonAddy. You can use unique emails per service, right? And that allows you to, again, decouple some of that information. There's another honorable mention here, and that's 33mail. It essentially provides the same service of AnonAddy. However, the reason I like AnonAddy more is just because it's open source. And you can actually go and look at the code. Although people say that, I don't know how many people actually do. Neither here nor there. Next. Great. We have a phone number. We're now able to sign up for stuff. We have to pay for stuff, though, right? That's sort of like the linchpin of all of this, is being able to pay for stuff. So when we talk about paying for stuff, we're going to talk about privacy.com for a sec. So essentially, privacy.com, it allows you to connect to your bank and make purchases with burner cards. Apple has a service similar to this where the merchant doesn't see your card number when you use Apple Pay, but you still have to use Apple, and your bank still gets to see the information of that transaction. With privacy, the bank doesn't know what you bought. It shows up as privacy.com, and the vendor doesn't know what card you're using because you're using a new card every time. It's really great when you want to make purchases and you don't want your wife to know what you bought, and it's just a dollar amount, and you can just hand wave that away, right? So now the bank doesn't have that information, the vendors don't have that information, and more importantly, you get the product that you ordered. So the one thing we haven't talked about, we have our phone, we have our email, we have our phone number that we're not giving out to anyone. What are we doing about phone numbers? Well, there's a tool called MySudo. And what MySudo does is it allows you to create on-the-fly phone numbers that will actually be registered with services, right? So you can actually go and type this phone number in Amazon for your 2FA or for your delivery notifications, and it'll work just fine. It will function essentially as a VoIP line, right? So you're not handing out the phone number that's associated with your SIM card, so companies aren't seeing your IMEI. They're just seeing your MySudo phone number, right? Again, another way that we can decouple that spider nest that we saw this morning, or the spider web that we saw earlier, right? And this is going to essentially replace your primary phone number. You'll have a phone number for Amazon, a phone number for Google, a phone number for the Etsy shop you're buying stickers off of, a phone number for your daughter's school, what have you, right? Well, what does that do with your old phone number? Because I'm assuming your old phone number is connected to everything, right? And this is the one time I usually say no to Google. Sorry, B-Sides. Usually say no to Google. But this is the one time I can recommend Google Voice. And here's why. Chances are you all have a Gmail account or have had a Gmail account at some point, right? This Gmail account you already have a history with. What I recommend is porting your number to Google Voice and then locking down that Gmail account. You don't want to let that number go back into the public pool of numbers, because what could potentially happen is your pharmacy, your doctor, or what have you, has that old number on file. They're not great about updating stuff. Fun fact, Betty at the front desk is not computer literate. So hitting that update button isn't her number one priority. It's making sure that you pay. So, when you change your phone number, it can get you can get a little hairy, and you can wind up with someone that you don't know getting your information that way. So like I said, if you port it over to Google Voice, I believe it's free still as of 8 o'clock this morning. So unless they pushed out a change, that's what I recommend for your old phone number. So we have our toolkit, right? We have our email, we have our new phone, we have our phone number, and we have a way to make purchases. Let's talk some pro gamer moves then. Okay, this is the one that everyone loves. Let's talk about your ISP. Well, you can now sign up. This is the only good thing about COVID. You can now sign up for your ISP without ever having to provide real information outside of your address. So John Doe can order your email or your ISP, and you can pay for it with privacy. So now your name is not associated with your internet service, just your address. Now let's talk about the IP itself that you get from your internet service provider. You're going to want to use a VPN. And you're not going to want to just use any VPN. The ones I recommend, again, these are because they've been tested in court. Mullvad VPN and Proton VPN are the most reliable. Here's the only thing, the only downside. If you're paying for gigabit and you're using one of these services to tunnel your traffic, you ain't getting gigabit. Not happening. So, hey, listen, that's just cost savings. You don't have to pay for gigabit. Pay for that $400 down and put it towards the iPhone that you have to buy now. That being said, if you are going to buy a VPN, pay for it. Just pay for it. If you're not paying for something, you are the product. So anyone that offers a free VPN service is not doing you a favor. Pay for it, pay for it, pay for it. Preferably one of these two. Links in bio. I'm kidding. Now let's talk about how we're going to take care of our home network. Obviously, we need to connect to the internet somehow. How do we do that? Well, obviously, we need a router of some kind. And the one that you get from Verizon or Comcast is probably phoning home. You have a couple options, actually, since we don't have to worry about that sweet, sweet gigabit. There's a company called Protectly that produces open source. They're actually just computers, but they're basically computers with a bunch of extra NICs, which is all a router really is. They produce, but the firmware's all open source. You could just buy an Intel NUC. You could go on eBay. And there are tons of companies getting rid of 5-year-old hardware that is more than capable for your home network, your home lab, what have you. Basically, if you can find a computer that has 4 gigs of RAM, you're ready to rock and roll. Buy a USB adapter, you're set. Now, what software are we going to run? There's really only 2 that I can safely say. I love this slide when it's blank. Where did it go? Hey, gang, I don't know what. Did I hit something? It's back. Hell yeah. Okay, moving on. Let's talk routing software. So there's 2 options in my opinion, OpenSense and pfSense. They're essentially forks of the same thing. Pick one. It's a routing software. If you know how a firewall works, you'll know how to configure one of these. Now, we're going to get into the tricky bit again, because we're going to talk Apple versus PC. And you probably won't kill me for this one. So when you're looking at a new computer, right, that you want to use to maintain your privacy, Apple is always an option. I really think their privacy is top tier on their devices. So you could go with a MacBook, or you could go with arguably the greatest laptop ever produced. That's right, the ThinkPad X220 from 2007. I love this thing. You can pick them up for $50. You can open source all of the hardware, and you can install whatever you want, including Mac OS. We ain't going to be doing that, though, right? So let's talk about OS for a minute. First off, we all know Windows 10, including Windows 11, they're privacy nightmares. even if you disable the telemetry, they're still sending a bunch of stuff back to Microsoft. We don't like that. And with Windows 11 now, you can't even create a local account on startup of a new computer. You have to have a Microsoft account. So not for me, bro. The other thing is, as much as I fawn for Apple sometimes, they just have dumb bugs, really. And they tend to not tell you about them until they're fixed, and that's usually too late. So, what does that leave us with, everyone? That's right, say it with me. Linux, everyone's favorite. So you have a couple options. If you just want your computer to work, just download Debian and call it a day. It's open source. They really are very stringent about that. And it will work on pretty much anything. I'm pretty sure at one point I installed Debian on a graphing calculator. If you want to be super paranoid, there's a operating system called CubesOS, which essentially allows you to do with your computer what we just did with our entire life, right? You have a virtual machine that's just for work. You have a virtual machine that's just for banking, for shopping, for your personal work, right? You can separate those out all within CubesOS. That, though, comes with its own set of headaches, although if you're really committed to this, there's no other real way to go. And then we got to talk about services, because with all this hardware comes services, right? An Echo is not worth its weight in gold if I can't yell at it and tell me when to leave for my next appointment. More specifically, to be at B-Sides to give a talk at 10 a.m. So we have all these services, right? Google, Dropbox, Netflix, right? What do we do about these services? Well, we self-host them. There are alternatives to all of this. And I think this is the crowd that would be most adept at actually pulling this off. You can basically self-host your entire life to the point where instead of, using someone else's computer, it's your computer. And you can point to the disk and say, that's where the photo of my dog is. And that's really where you can start to take even more of your privacy back, right? I do want to shout out HomeLab OS, Nick Busey. He makes self-hosting a lot of this stuff really, really, really easy. You fill in a couple forms, fill in a couple YAML files, and you're off to the races. I tested it, and this is ageist if anything. I apologize, but even my mom could do it. So, great. We have a bunch of tools. I've talked about a bunch of tools. I've talked about a bunch of crap. What are we actually going to do with it? Like, how does this work in practice? So, as I said before, we have this rat's nest, right? We want to get to here. Well, how do we do that? Well, let's say, hypothetically, you win an Amazon Echo from one of the vendors outside, right? Well, you're going to need to sign up an account with one of your brand new computers that you just bought, right? And you're going to connect to that Amazon service with one of your VPNs that you just purchased. And you're going to sign up for an account that you're going to use with that Amazon Echo. Cool. We'll just chug along. What you're going to use for your user or for your email address is going to be a randomly generated Anon-Addy address, right? And you can see here, we just click sign in, punch in some fake information. Anon-Addy will forward that email and verification to Proton Mail, and we'll be able to verify our email. Great. Now we have an account. Look at that. John Doe, we have our Anon-Addy email, and we have our password, right? Well, now we need a phone number that's tied to it. So that's where we go to sudo. We come in here, we can pick from a list of phone numbers, call it second, because we are, if anything but creative. And from there, we're able to tie it to our account, use it for 2FA, use it for notifications. And we have our Amazon or Echo Plus hooked up, right? Well, now I want to be able to yell at it and tell it I need toilet paper because there's a storm coming, right? That's where privacy.com comes in. We create a new privacy card. By the way, this is live. If anyone writes this down and can use it before anyone else, great, you get $10 on me. Enjoy. But as you can see, we are able, 3254, look at that, 3254, Elliot Anderson. We're able to add that to our account under a completely different name too. And that's how we set up our Echo Plus. And now, we have a nice mustachioed man. Look at him, he's gorgeous. Able to use our Echo Plus. And that's it. You're private. That's the end of it. Nothing else. There's no problems with this. No flaws at all. Right? There are some cons. So, first things first. Not all services are going to like your VoIP phone number from MySudo. It'll often get flagged as a prepaid number. So that can be difficult. The other thing, the way privacy.com works today, when you create those cards, they're created as gift cards, and some merchants don't like that. I can assure you Amazon does. The other thing is added complexity, and this is probably the biggest con. When you set your life up like this, you become the single point of failure. If something were to happen to me, my wife is screwed. Okay. The added complexity is certainly something that you have to account for, right? You're not using as much compute space, but now you are up here. There's more to remember. There's more to sort of process at any given moment. I've gotten really good at responding to names that aren't my own because of it. And finally, it doesn't account for anyone else. And this is the one that I experienced most recently. My kids were going to go to summer camp. My mom signed them up. Just gave my information out. No problem. Here's his full name, his address, his phone number, all this other crap. You can't account for what other people do, right? So if the other people in your life are not bought into the same program, this ain't going to work, right? And finally, we have three real things to consider. Conspicuousness, money, and what I call privacy fatigue. So here's the problem. When you, I'm going to use this image as much as humanly possible. When you try to decouple your life, right, and maintain more privacy, the problem is you also become rapidly more noticeable. Who's this guy with 8 people living at his address, right, with different names? Who's this guy that every time he checks out, he uses 30 different credit cards, right? There's a level of conspicuousness. It's oh God, I've been watching a lot of Law and Order in quarantine, so I apologize. But there's an episode of Law and Order where the guy is trying to avoid cameras by using this face paint. Right. The problem is the dude is now walking around outside in face paint. Right. So it's not that the cameras didn't pick him up at all. Right. But everyone noticed the weird guy in face paint on the 6, right? So the part of this is you do become a little bit more noticeable. The other problem that we touched on is money, right? I don't know if you started doing some of the tallies in your head. Just to get started on a lot of the stuff I talked about, it's about $1,000. Let's be honest, between your internet service provider, getting the new phone, getting your SIM card set up, signing up for all these services, it's about $1,000. And that means that to a certain extent, this privacy is behind a paywall, right? You basically have to rip and replace your life. And we all know how well that goes in business, right? I would argue that that's not how life should be. Everyone has a right to privacy, right? I don't think that that's a debatable fact. The problem is that right is kept behind, $1,000 and know-how. The other problem here is privacy fatigue. It's exhausting living like this. It is not sustainable. And you're going to mess up. It's the old security adage, right? The attacker has to be right once. You have to be perfect all of the time. And that's very much the case with this. So yeah, you can go through and do a lot of this stuff to take some of your privacy back, and I encourage it. I absolutely do. This is not a fatalist view. Everyone has a right to privacy. Everyone should be trying to maintain their privacy. I know the usual response to that is, oh, well, I don't have anything to hide. And it's not about having anything to hide. It's about, let's put it this way. We all know what you do when you go to the bathroom. But I would argue that it takes a very specific type of person to want to do that in a public venue. Privacy is not about having something to hide. Privacy is about choosing the when, where, and how you disclose information about yourself and loved ones, right? So what can we... Yeah, we can do this ourselves, right? But let's be honest, my mom's not flashing an Android phone. You know, I'm not going to convince my brother, I'm not going to convince my brother to install cubes, right? He's got Excel documents to work on. He's a productive member of society, unlike the degenerate that stands before you. Well, there are a couple groups that are actually fighting for our rights. And while I don't recommend... I always recommend direct action, right? You don't need to give these people your money. What I would recommend is you give these people your time and attention. There are a couple. One is MARP, or the March Against Revenge Porn. They are a group obviously fighting for the rights of people who have suffered from non-consensual image abuse. Ironically enough, privacy is part of that. The other option is Operation Safe Escape. They help victims of domestic violence get out of those situations. They, again, are also very concerned about the privacy of their clientele, right? So it behooves them to fight for stronger privacy policies. And finally, last but certainly not least, the EFF. You know them, you love them. I don't need to say any more on that. And gang, that is my talk. I think we have 6 minutes for questions. So what I will ask, it tends to be male-dominated. So if I could have alternating people who identify as female or non-binary with men who identify as male or non-binary asking questions back and forth, that would be preferable. So any women who identify as female or non-binary? Questions? Dope. Dudes, let's go. What do we got? Right there. The only reason I don't recommend OpenWRT is because it's a little bit more limited in its functionality. So when you're looking at solutions, OpenWRT gives you somewhat the what you need to run essentially a home network, whereas OpenSense and pfSense, they have plugins and more that will run on beefier hardware, and you get more of an enterprise experience. So you can do stuff like DPI with OpenSense and pfSense, whereas with OpenWRT, it will chug. Does that answer your question? Female or non-binary? Cool. Next dude. What do we got? Right here.
Are we concerned that we just replace Google with these other services that have all of our data, like privacy.com?
Fantastic question. Yes, we should be concerned. And that's why, again, what we're fighting for is, better privacy protections overall. That being said, the reason these services were chosen is because they have a track record for maintaining their users' privacy, whereas Google has made it pretty clear, Facebook has made it pretty clear, your data's up for sale. Anyone else? Yes.
How does a service provider avoid coughing up information in court of law?
Great question. They don't have it in the first place. That's the key here. Great, wonderful. How does a service provider how is a service provider prevented from coughing up information in the first place in a court of law? And the answer to that is they don't have it in the first place. For Proton Mail, all they have is your email address and your password. And not even your password, they have the salt of your password and it's stored, whatever. I'm not great at encryption, I'll be perfectly blunt. That's math, and I failed sophomore algebra, okay? So don't ask me about math. I trust the nerds on that one. But essentially, the idea is that these companies will collect the least amount of data possible to provide you your service. So Proton Mail, they have your email address. They don't necessarily need a name. You can pay for it in Bitcoin or Monero or whatever. Mullvad, they don't even have that much information. They have your user ID that is randomly generated when you click sign up, and that's it. So the idea here, great question. The idea here is that these companies collect the least amount of information possible. So there's nothing that a court can compel them to give to them because there's nothing to be had. Any other questions? Right here. Tips for combing through privacy policies. Great. I did mention at the start that I do have panic attacks reading privacy policies. I don't have a great answer for that, unfortunately. I forget where I read it, but there's a statistic floating out there, and someone will probably find me and correct me on Twitter after this, that it would take you 800 years to read every single privacy policy that we agree to in our daily lives, right? That's not doable for anyone. There are a couple services I know that are out there that'll help you sort of process these policies, but those policies can change at any time, and it requires someone to read them to fully understand what is in there. So the data tends to be a little bit behind, right, what their current privacy policy may be. What do I think of Tor? Here's this goes back to that conspicuous part that I mentioned at the beginning. The only problem I have with Tor is that people will know you're using Tor, right? Or your internet experience will be functionally unusable, right? If anyone here has tried to use Tor over a VPN, look, I lived through to the 90s. I don't want to go back, okay? So that's from a usability and conspicuousness perspective, that's the only reason I don't leverage Tor. Although, that being said, Cubes OS, which is made by a bunch of really great folks, all those updates run over Tor. So, you know, what the hell do I know? Right here. Essentially, yes. It is a how to create a sock puppet. Different use cases. Tails is sort of like, I should have prefaced this at the beginning. This applies to corporate surveillance, right? If you're targeted by a nation state actor, don't ask me for help. Don't talk to me. I don't need that heat, right? I don't want to deal with that. But essentially, yes, it is how to create a sock puppet. These tools, much like many in the InfoSec industry, can be used for good. They can also be used for bad. But I would argue that the masses having this information at hand is worth the risk. But yes, it is essentially how to create a sock puppet. 100%. Any other questions? Sorry I didn't say that in the mic. Any other questions? Oh, right there. God, I don't want to wade into these waters. So the question was my recommendation for MB. Why didn't I recommend Plex? Here's the deal. I have a Plex server. Let's be honest. How many people here have a Plex server at home? Right. Do you know why you have a Plex server at home? Because it freaking works. I love MB, and I cannot stand some of the stuff that Plex is doing right now because I'm worried that their business model is moving away from personal media server to personal streaming service, right? But it works. I'm giving this talk, right? Everyone can see what computer I have. I'm not giving this talk from a ThinkPad that I rooted and did all that other stuff to. You know why? Because my Mac works. That's the problem. All of this stuff is a nightmare to deal with, and it doesn't, it's not anything that anyone outside of our field can understand, which is why we need to pick up the mantle and fight for these better protections. am giving this presentation from a Mac because, I'm sorry, LibreOffice and OpenOffice, absolutely terrible. They're not, I'm going to get so much flack for this. Terrible. They're not great for daily use. They're great if you want to support open source. I like what they're doing. But from a like presentation perspective or like daily use, again, there's a very select group of people that can pull that off, and I am not one of them. I'm not farting around with fonts at 2 in the morning when I'm trying to get a presentation done, okay? I'm sorry. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry. I went off on a rant there. No, it's because, so Emby is more focused on providing a personal media server, and Plex is slowly becoming more focused on being like everyone else and gathering your data, right? They want to be a personal streaming service, right? They want you to hook all your accounts up to them so that you can find where Bluey is playing, in your streaming library. And that's, the other thing is, I don't like that they require their authentication servers to be on in order for you to authenticate to your personal server. That was another complaint. It's my data is here. I can see it. I can look at the files, but I can't play it because your authentication servers are down. So that's why I recommend Emby over Plex. I think the long-term viability is much better from a personal media server perspective. That answer it? Cool. I don't know how much time I have for more questions. I don't know if someone's flagging me down. What's up? 5 minutes? Okay, we can probably do 2 more. Anyone else? Right here. You guys love throwing questions that are going to cause problems. Yes, I do. And it's meeting people where they're at, right? For all the flaws that Signal and the organization might have, it's better than, it's better than iMessage. It's better than just plain text message. And if I can if it's ease of use is to the point where I can convince, my loved ones to use it, great, fine, I'll put up with the gifts, but whatever. You know what I mean? And I mean, that is absolutely a situation where it's meet people where they are at, right? What's the other one that I'm thinking of that everyone's on? Not WhatsApp. Oh, God. Thank you. Telegram. Yeah. Some people use Telegram. Some people use Wire. Right? There are all these different encrypted email or encrypted messaging applications. It's all about what's the easiest to use and what you can get people on, because something is better than nothing. One last question. Right there. Sorry, can you... years of drumming has left my hearing absolutely obliterated. A good solution to a master password. Are you like a password manager? So, you can actually, so there's 2 options here, really, in my opinion, outside of buying a service, right? There's Bitwarden and there's KeePass, right? So Bitwarden is essentially, it's akin to 1Password or LastPass or Dashlane or whatever your favorite YouTuber's hawking. They provide a fairly seamless experience. You can host it yourself, and you can use YubiKeys and set up 2FA properly with it. That being said, if you don't want to deal with all that hassle, KeePass is the next best solution. That being said, the only problem with KeePass is you need to make sure that you can get that database somewhere, and make sure that it's up to date, so that you can use it. I've many a time been burned by that. There's nothing like being stuck at an Alamo rent-a-car, unable to log into your email because you didn't sync the right password database over, okay? So, potential downsides. All right, gang, I think that's my time. That being said, I'll be here all day. Find me. I'm the dude in the floral pirate's hat. You can hunt me down. I could talk about this for hours. So thank you for coming, everyone. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great rest of your day.